American Red Cross is a name for some of our neighbors. More than 1.5 million volunteers around the country who can help us through an emergency when we need them.
Hi everybody, and welcome to our program, Your Red Cross in Action. My name is Allison McCartney, and I'm almost a 6-year volunteer with the American Red Cross. And I'm also the Red Cross liaison to a wonderful organization called SMART, which stands for the State of Massachusetts Animal Response Team. And joining me today is the president of SMART, David Schwartz. And we also have my little buddy here, Calvin, and he's here to help us introduce today's program, which is actually going to be preparing for your pets in the event of a disaster. So David, before we start, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about SMART and the relationship that we have, you have with the Red Cross.
Well, we, as Allison said, SMART is the State of Massachusetts Animal Response Team. It is a coalition of organizations and agencies and individuals that are committed to taking care of the needs of animals that might be affected by an emergency or disaster. We're very excited to be working with the Red Cross. This has certainly been something that's been lacking in emergency management in the past, and we're well along the way here in Massachusetts to making sure that we take care of that need. We actually have several teams, and we're from sheltering to veterinary services to an assessment team, animal control officers, and we're working at trying to approach this in a regional way across the state, because as we all know, emergencies happen locally.
Yep. Very good, thank you. One of the important ways that the Red Cross is partnering with SMART is when it comes to sheltering. Sheltering in a disaster, as you know, Red Cross tends to set up shelters if people have to evacuate, and the shelters could be set up whether it's a multifamily house fire or in some of the more serious cases when we're preparing for a hurricane, or even in the case of the recent floods we've had the last couple of years, the Red Cross has had to set up shelters. We'll talk a little bit about sheltering a little bit later in the program, but what we first want to talk about is how you at home can prepare for your pets before a disaster actually strikes. So one of the Red Cross mottos is to be prepared, and they suggest 3 fairly easy steps. The first one is to get a kit. The second one is to make a plan, and the third one is to get informed. So let's start with the kit. When we talk about preparing for people in an emergency, the Red Cross suggests you put together a kit with things like a first aid kit, your medications, a 3-day supply of food and water, and that type of thing. Let's talk a little bit about what we can do for our pets.
Okay, well, we actually have many of the items that you would want to include in a kit right here on the table, and we'll go through some of them. Many of them are similar to what you would need for yourself, but just for your pets. So we have things like a collapsible water bowl, which is easy to put in a bag and then pop open and put water in. This is another style of the same thing. There are pre-made meals that you can get online. You can certainly take a Ziploc bag and put, a 3-day supply of dog food in there, kibble, things like that. Pop-up cans of dog food or cat food.
And some of the things online are actually prepared so they have a 5-year shelf life, but if you want to do as David suggests, you could actually put things in a Ziploc bag and just make sure you rotate them.
Right, you just have to be aware they're perishable, and you want to make sure that you rotate those out and use them.
Very good.
Many other things, you certainly want to have some form of identification. Pictures are very good. I see you have a very nice picture of Calvin here. That's very important. I would try to take a picture of Calvin with a family member, because if he is admitted to a shelter, we like to be able to match you back together again at the end, and as many pieces of evidence that we can have helps facilitate that process. Also in this folder are medical records, which are very important. We want to know, does Calvin have some significant medical history that we need to know about if he is admitted to a shelter? Are there medications he should be on? And you should have a supply of those medications that you can give to us if he is admitted to a shelter.
And I would assume for a shelter you'd want to have records showing that he's up to date on his shots and his treatments and everything.
Absolutely. Infectious disease control is very important in a pet shelter, and we don't want to increase any hazards that these little guys might be affected by. So absolutely. And you want to keep that current. You want to get your veterinarian will be happy to make you a copy of the records and update those accordingly. And then there's always the cleanup supplies. Animals do go to the bathroom, and we have to be able to take care of that. So we want to be able to have a supply of plastic bags and alcohol and things like that, and make sure that we're not creating an unhealthy situation wherever we might be with our pets. It's good to have one of these kits in your house that you can take with you if you need it. It's good to have a 3-day supply in your house if you're staying home and sheltering in place. And it's also good to have a kit in your car in case you haven't been able to go back home to get it. So you want to have several of these kits available to you.
And some of the other things that we kind of show is if a pet has to be put in a shelter, you might want to have some things like his favorite blanket or maybe a play toy, something to make him feel a little bit more comfortable while he's away from you in the shelter. Right.
Familiar smells are very important, for animals. So if you can bring his favorite toy or blanket, that's a great idea. The other thing to keep in mind is dogs that are wonderful pets and would never harm a fly, when they're in a stressful situation like this, might in fact bite somebody. So you want to have a muzzle. One of the basket muzzles is something that you should have in your kit. And you want to practice putting it on your pet so that they tolerate it. Your cat needs to practice going into a cat carrier, because just because you have the carrier doesn't mean that that's going to work out very well. So you want to, prepare ahead of time, take the carrier, put the cat in the carrier, make sure you demystify that for them, and they know it's a safe place.
Right. You don't want to make it a scary situation for them, too. We know it's difficult sometimes for people to be in a shelter, so we want to make the animal feel at home as well.
Right. And I would just quickly add that, we're focusing on small animals today, but really you have to think about this for large animals as well, and make sure your horses are trained to have a stranger put a halter on, a lead rope, and walk onto a trailer. So no matter what type of pet you may have, you want to have a kit ready for them.
Okay, and we also want to have some first aid supplies as well for them.
Absolutely. A number of very good first aid kits available through Red Cross for pets, as well as other vendors, but that's a great idea to have a first aid kit for your pet.
Okay, very good. So that's covering how to put together a kit. So you want to make sure that you put that kit with your family kit, and be prepared.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we'll be right back after a few minutes, and we'll talk about our next thing, which is to make a plan. Okay, so we talked about getting together a kit for our pets. The next thing, the next step is to make a plan. Now, the Red Cross talks about all sorts of disasters, whether it's sheltering in place, the need to shelter in place, or potentially leave your home. Types of things that the Red Cross talks about for people is basically to say, talk to your family about your plan, make a meeting place in case family members are separated, make sure you know the location of the kit that you're going to take with you. How can people include pets in those emergency plans?
Well, if you are going to be taking your pets, which we certainly hope everybody will be doing after this program, you want to be sure that the place you're taking them to is pet friendly. So while we are working on the shelter aspect of that, if you are going to a relative's house or something like that, you want to be sure that they know that it's okay for you to bring along Calvin, and that Calvin gets along with their dog and things like that. So you want to get all these things worked out ahead of time. You may want to find out if there's a neighbor that can take your pets, or somebody else that can take the pets, and you may be able to go off to a shelter, to a safe place. And the same as we already mentioned, sheltering in place, as long as you know that you have the right supplies for a 3-day stay, then you want to just make sure you have those same provisions for your animals. Practicing is very important with pets. They don't understand what's going on, and they pick up on the stress levels that we all have. And we want to make sure that we at least practice these in a controlled situation, so that they do know that everything is going to be okay. It's going to be an awful situation for everybody, so anything we can do to mitigate those conditions and get them familiar with it, they'll remember and they'll know that things are going to work out okay. So planning is very important for the pets as well. And of course, the preparation of that kit is probably the foundation for that.
Sure. So no surprises to your brother when you say, I want to bring my dog over, we need a place to stay. That stuff
exactly.
You should set up in advance.
Exactly. And do you have enough cat carriers for all your cats and leashes and
Sure.
all those things you want to plan out ahead of time. And does your cat or dog have a favorite hiding place that he may be in,
Right.
so that you know how you're going to approach all these problems that may pop up.
Okay. Now, one of the questions a lot of people might have is, disaster strikes anytime. So what happens if I'm away from home and, something happens where I've got to evacuate, I can't get back to my home, but my pets are there? What do you recommend?
Well, the first thing you want to do is have somebody else, a neighbor that you've formed a relationship with, a buddy system, so that they know how many animals in your house, where they might be hiding, and that they're comfortable with handling them. Excuse me. Then the other thing is, there are stickers available from many of the humane groups to put on your windows so that first responders know what kinds of animals to look for, and even a little floor plan where they might be hiding. So that if first responders are going into your home, they know where to look for the cat or the dog. How many horses are in your barn, things like that, so that they can be rescued, in the most efficient way. So you may not be there, but a phone call to a cooperative neighbor
Sure.
that you've worked this out with will definitely go a long way if something does happen.
Okay. So the next thing is to be informed. Now, one of the things we tell people is that you can, go out to your town's website or talk to the emergency management, and find out, what is the disaster plan for the community or town? Are there shelters available? That type of thing. What can people do to be better informed about, the local planning to kind of include their pets in? Right.
I think the ability for pets to be sheltered is still a relatively new concept for many local governments, and there's still a lot of pushback. So you do want to be sure that your town has included pets in their emergency management plan. And if they haven't, then they can reach out to SMART or to the Red Cross, and we can help them do that. So the first thing is to be sure that they're in your local plan, and then see where they're going to be sheltered. And if they're not going to be sheltered in your town, is there a local boarding facility that will take them? What are the pet-friendly hotels in your area? And will they take them, while they may not take them under normal circumstances, many hotels and motels will take pets in an emergency situation. So you want to try to find out these things ahead of time, and certainly try to get your emergency managers locally to start thinking of pets in their plans.
Yeah. So really want to have your ideal plan. Maybe it's taking your pet somewhere to a neighbor or to a relative, but
Right.
you also want to have a backup plan, because it's a lot harder these days sometimes to place pets in an emergency and
Right. Ideally, you don't want to go to a shelter, I think, either as a person or for the animal. Ideally, you want to not be part of the burden. You want to be able to evacuate and go to a relative's house that's outside of the danger zone.
Sure.
But if that's not possible, then you need to look into these other options for your pets.
Very good. So let's talk a little bit about when disaster actually strikes and you do need to evacuate. People have heard the horror stories, I guess, from Hurricane Katrina, where they were forced to leave their pets behind. Fortunately, coming out of Katrina is the fact that the governments have mandated that emergency management takes into consideration people who would be evacuating with pets. So that's a good thing that's come out of Katrina. But I understand that SMART has a campaign locally called When You Go, They Go. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That's probably the most important take-home messages from our program today, is that under no circumstances, when you are asked to evacuate your house, whether it be for an hour or what you're told is going to be an hour, or if you know it's going to be for days, you always take your pets with you. This, as you said, Katrina and Rita taught us a lot of, unfortunately, very awful stories. But we've learned from them. And we know that as far as reducing any hazards to both the human population as well as the dangers to first responders, the best thing we can all do is take our pets with us.
And you never want to assume that you can go back to get them, because
That's
if the
exactly
area is
right.
closed down, you're out of luck.
So if it's a gas leak that they say you'll be back in your house in an hour, that's fine, but you still want to take your pets with you. You do not want to leave them there.
Better safe than sorry.
We've seen circumstances where that hour becomes a day, becomes 3 days, and then we have some first responders that are forced to go back into a dangerous situation to rescue animals.
And they may not do that.
They may not do that, and then we have people that will take unnecessary risk
right.
to get their animals. We're very aware of the human companion animal bond. You know, these guys are they're members of our families now.
Sure.
And we're not going to leave them in any dangerous situation. So if it's 10 minutes or it's 3 days, if you're evacuating, they go with you. Absolutely. If you go, they go.
Very good. We'll take a brief pause, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about the sheltering process. So we talked about being informed. One of the ways that people can also be informed is to take a first aid class. Not only are the first aid classes offered for the Red Cross for people, but the Red Cross also offers first aid class for pets. And you can look at your local Red Cross, call your local Red Cross, or you go on the web to www.bostonredcross.org, and you can get a list of the upcoming pet first aid classes and people first aid classes. Talking about first aid, what happens, you know, if a pet is injured during a disaster? What types of things should we think about?
Well, you have to remember when they're injured in a disaster situation, there's a lot of commotion and things like this. There's commotion for them no matter when they're injured, but certainly in a disaster situation. So they are once again not themselves. They're not their normal personalities that might lick you on the face. You have to approach them very carefully. It's a very good idea to put a temporary muzzle on an animal that's been injured. And then, of course, you don't want to add any further injury to what might have already happened, so you have to be careful in how they're put on a stretcher and things like that. And these first aid courses are an excellent way to learn more about doing these things the best way. If they are injured, once they are presented to SMART, we would have a veterinary staff that would take over from there. Okay. But as a first responder to a pet, you have to be very careful and make sure that you're not put in harm's way in trying to help the animal.
Even if it's your own pet, because if a pet's hurt, you don't know how they're going to react, even if they're yours. So,
and that's in day-to-day living, too. I mean, if your dog happens to be hit by a car, then you have to keep these things in mind as well. So once again, the first aid class is an excellent idea.
Very good. Okay, so we've covered all of the being prepared stuff, and now we want to talk a little bit about what happens when you do have to evacuate, you do have to leave your home, and you choose to go to a shelter. Another kind of, some of the horror stories that came out of Katrina was that people were able to go to shelters, they did bring their pets, and they were not reunited with their pets after the fact. And I know as a pet owner myself, that would just be, you know, unbearable. So let's talk a little bit about basically how we partner together. We go and we'll set up a people shelter, and you in turn will try to co-locate a shelter either in the same building or nearby. And one of the things I was very impressed about with SMART in particular is their registration and identification process. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Sure. So as Allison mentioned, when a shelter is set up for people, we try to what's called co-locate an animal shelter. And we try to do it as close to the human shelter as possible, because we really want the animals to be able to see their owners while they're being sheltered, and vice versa. It's a comforting thing for everybody. We also, it lessens our volunteer load if we have people helping us take care of their own animals. So ideally, we like to have the shelter as close by as possible. And that's the model that we're trying to pursue across the state as we look at shelter locations. Intake of animals will occur before the intake of the people, because the animals cannot go into the human shelter.
Right. We only, you know, the Red Cross unfortunately can only allow service animals in their shelters, and that's why we
we will take care of the animals first, and intake is probably one of the most important things that we do, and we take it very, very seriously. We do have a very sophisticated computer-based intake software program. that we use that does a lot to make sure that animals and owners' identities are kept connected. It will eventually evolve into a barcode system so that there'll be even more security. But let's say that that's not available, that the computer system's not available. We do have a very sophisticated and detailed animal intake form that we go over as the animals are coming in. We take photographs of the animal with the owner and assign a number to it. We do both a collar for the dog as well as a wristband for the owners. So that we try to identify and have a redundancy in this as much as possible. You're absolutely right in that one of the saddest things that happened after Katrina again was that people still have not been reunited with their pets. And we will do absolutely everything we can to make sure that never happens in Massachusetts. So intake takes a lot of time, it's tedious, but it is so important.
Absolutely. And when the person then goes off to the Red Cross shelter, you know, they can feel a little bit more comfortable that their animals are well taken care of, that they still can get access to their animals, and that they're going to get their animals back.
And going to a shelter for a person, too, is a very stressful thing. So we want to try to at least alleviate some of the stress and let them know when they hand off Calvin to me that they're going to get Calvin back when they can go back home again. And we'll do everything we can to make sure that they know that. We want it to be a very secure, safe feeling for them when we're taking care of their pets. We take it very, very seriously. Very
good. Well, your process, I've seen it in test, and it's really a wonderful thing, and one that I'm sure many organizations outside of the state of Massachusetts are going to look to emulate.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we're going to take a quick break and show you a video about animals in disaster.
If you had to evacuate your home for any reason, chances are you would take your pet with you. However, you should know, most shelters cannot accept pets because of state regulations. Plan for places you and your pets can stay while out of your home. If disaster strikes while away from home, make arrangements for someone to evacuate your pets and meet you at a prearranged site. If you are warned of impending disaster, bring your pets inside. Never leave a dog chained in the yard. Always have a leash and collar available for your dog so you can make a quick getaway. Even if your pet is very obedient and stays by your side, in an emergency or chaos, you and your pet may not be at your best. For cat owners, have a cat carrier handy. It's also a good idea to have a small backpack ready with your pet's food, water, a can opener, an extra leash, and a blanket, and any medication. Make sure your pet always wears some sort of identification, because even an indoor pet can become disoriented by sudden disasters. There are new methods of identification you can discuss with your vet, like the use of microchips, which are painlessly placed under your pet's skin.
Pets have and always will serve as wonderful companions throughout our lives, unconditionally giving us love and happiness along the way. The American Red Cross hopes you will use what you've learned to ensure your pet's health and safety and give back to them the love and support they so richly deserve. For certified training, we encourage you to contact your local chapter of the American Red Cross and enroll in our first aid program.
So David, when we have a disaster, we want to obviously be ready with volunteers. You know, the Red Cross is constantly recruiting for volunteers to take care of the people, and I can imagine that SMART's doing the same thing. So if somebody wants to become a SMART volunteer, what's involved in doing that?
Well, it's actually quite easy, and we welcome everyone to join our team. The most important thing to remember, though, is you need to be trained. You need to have special skills to be handling animals, especially in emergency situations. So we do require an ICS 100 course, the NIMS 700 course. There are animal handling courses that we like to see everybody take. We certainly, while we appreciate everybody's best intentions, if you have not been credentialed properly, you cannot be on the SMART team. So we urge you all to take the trainings and join the team. The sub-teams that we have, as I mentioned, there's an assessment team, which kind of, stages how much we need to bring into an emergency or disaster. Animal control officers are very involved in our team. The shelter operations is probably the most important team, because that's probably what we're going to be doing most of. We have a team for search and rescue. Certainly very technical skills are needed to be on that team. Veterinary services, most of the people on that team are either veterinarians or veterinary technicians, but we do need support staff in that team as well. So those are our teams. We really want everybody to be trained appropriately, though. The other team that I didn't mention is the specialized species teams. We should mention take care of all kinds of pets. So if you have that turtle or that snake or that whatever bird, we will take them at our shelters as long as we have the people that are trained to take care of them. Very, very important.
Okay, and the courses are easy to take. Are some of them online? You know, how much of a time commitment would that be?
Some of them are online, and some of them are hands-on. You really have to show us that you can handle animals properly. We don't want any of our volunteers being hurt and adding to the burden of an emergency situation. So we welcome everybody's participation. The information's on our website. And we certainly would love to have more volunteers across the state, too. Sure. Not just Eastern Massachusetts.
As does the Red Cross,
yes,
so we understand.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, we've covered a lot today. A lot of information out there. You don't have to remember it all. We have, you can go out on the web and go to SMART's website, which is www.smart-mass.org. You can also go to the Red Cross website. The local Red Cross is bostonredcross.org. And most importantly, just remember the Red Cross motto, and that's to be prepared. And that really applies not only to people, but also our four-legged friends.
The other motto I would reiterate is if you go, they go.
Absolutely. So good advice. Well, want to thank David for his time today, and thank Calvin. That's all for this episode of the Red Cross in Action. We hope you learned a lot, and we hope you'll watch again soon. Have a great day.
The American Red Cross is a name for some of our neighbors. More than 1.5 million volunteers around the country who can help us through an emergency when we need them.